Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Prolific Writing's Read Through. And today we are reading through chapter 13 of Feather Sharp as Knives. And we are getting into it now. So we just went through the last chapter. And guys, I'm going to be posting up a link here for the playlist so you guys can see the rest of the read through as well as the previous episodes so you can catch up on anything you've missed. But we just had a crazy sort of chapter with Venezia and her husband, super toxic relationship, and we learned how to write some very subtle relationship drama, but also just how do you go and make sort of write petty sort of interpolitical marriages and characters, and doing a really authentic and good take on that. I'm actually really impressed by it. It was a very layered chapter, and it's good. It's a good read because that shows a toxic relationship as well as I've seen without a lot of the dramatics and flair that are present in a lot of modern day stuff. So that's really good. Anyway, guys, let's get into it. Start reading in chapter 13 here. So, also, by the way, if you have any questions you guys are liking or you want to put in your own things to read and I can read and give you guys some advice, feel free to look down in the link below and submit your stuff so I can read through first chapters and short stories I'm a huge fan of. And if I love it, we'll put it up here and be able to give you some feedback as you need, help you get better at writing. It's anonymous until proven otherwise if you're not working with me. So don't worry about being embarrassed or anything. Just trying to help people and myself become better at writing. Anyway, without further ado, Feather Sharp as Knives, chapter 13. The opulent dining hall finally began to fill as dignitaries streamed in. Riel Tani arrived on time for temple services, boat launches, and nothing else. The Doge himself would arrive fashionably late. Anselmo should have realized. He'd been so eager to find a patron, he'd arrived right at 8. For 15 minutes, he was the only one here. Wow, that's a good take. That's a good touch. It tells you this is not his universe. Even then, the room remained sparse for another quarter hour. People chatted and laughed in the dark wood-paneled room, and servants wove between them with silver trays piled with wine and appetizers. Their fine clothes rustled and their jewels sparkled. The candles alone cost a small fortune. This was a life worth living. This was Imelda's world. She viewed Anselmo as her peer, but he wasn't. Not yet. And even within this society, there were levels. The merchants weren't the equals of the nobility. They brown-nosed the haughty noblemen and women, even though some of their clothes were finer and their pockets deeper. I know what that feels like. But a few families rose above the rest the way Palazzo Dogal rose above the city. The Albizis belonged to that highest tier. Their family ran the labyrinth, and the government paid well for its elite training grounds. Anselmo skirted the edge of the party. When he'd arrived, a page, obviously surprised by Anselmo's punctuality, had met him at the door with instructions to mingle. The woman had smirked at him as he stared at the empty room. But now it was full, and Anselmo still hadn't spoken to a soul. How could he mingle with the wealthy elite? Men and women drank and celebrated La Serencima's victory over the rebellious vassal city Zorzi, a victory they had no part in, yet they would profit just the same. The rich people regarded him as if they knew his humble beginnings. They glanced in his direction, but their gaze slid away as if bored. A lowly lieutenant, nothing more. The other lion candidates were all nobles or wealthy merchants, none of them firstborns who inherited the right to take over the family business. So their parents had paid for their chance to enter the labyrinth. The candidates lounged at a table together, laughing and drinking. No need to mingle. No need to introduce themselves to potential patrons. They already knew everyone here. They might have the advantage tonight, but that would all change in a couple of weeks. The rings on their fingers glittered in the candlelight, but Anselmo would outshine all of it once the doors of the labyrinth slid shut behind them. Of course, Anselmo wouldn't even be able to enter the labyrinth if he didn't get a patron tonight. Ooh, there's some juicy, juicy drama. So he's looking for a patron. That's the goal of this chapter. Doce Albizi stood on the far side of the room, greeting the partygoers with a nod. The people around him must be the richest and most influential. Anselmo should start with them. He took a breath and smoothed the front of his doublet. It and his shirt was almost too tight. He left it in Rialto while in Zorzi, and there hadn't been any that fit him at the tailor's that morning. But the velvet was still in good condition. He'd been planning on wearing it on the first night of Carnival with Imelda. She'd probably appreciate the snug fit. Ooh, seems like he's not the only one that had his carnival costume taken down. If you guys didn't remember, the dress Imelda wore for her betrothal was intended for Carnival and intended for Anselmo. So it seems like they're both having things a little misused. He needed to focus, though through the crowd to get to the doche was quickest. He started across, but a hand on his arm forestalled him. Lieutenant Anselmo Irari, Fleet Admiral Venezio Dandolo said when he turned. Oh, it's Venezia. She didn't wear her military uniform, which was jarring since he was only used to seeing her in a professional capacity. But her dress was still in the colors of the military, gray-blue with bright blue embroidery along the hems. I was hoping to find you tonight. Anselmo saluted her across her arm. Anselmo saluted her, arm across the chest. Fleet Admiral? She smiled. You're friends with Imelda and Archiro, correct? Yes, ma'am. I'm surprised you remembered. You're rather unforgettable. Unforgettable. That's what you are. Anyway, she smiled, waved down a servant, and retrieved 2 glasses of wine. The wine is excellent. Primo selected it himself as always. You should enjoy yourself tonight. Have to find a patron, ma'am. They'll be more likely to accept you if you relax. She nodded at the people around them, then gestured at his drink. He sipped the wine to comply. She tapped her finger on her glass. I spoke with your mother a few times. She was a unique woman, very determined and ambitious in her own way. Where was she going with this? But there was no hint of derision in her voice or demeanor. She was a fighter, he said. I could tell. She seemed willing to do anything for you. Anselmo hesitated. Yes, his mother had sacrificed much for him, her soul even, if the priests were to be believed. She trained Anselmo without mercy, but had forged him into the man he was today. She loved me very much. It shows. She set their glasses on a passing servant's tray. He'd only drunk half of his, and she'd barely touched hers. The waiter would dump the undoubtedly expensive wives into the canal at the end of the night. Come. No one will sponsor you if they can't meet you. She led him into the thick of the party. Now people began to pay attention, though not in an obvious way. Out of the corner of their eyes, over someone's shoulder, the Field Admiral was referring a lieutenant. Clearly information they could use, weaponize even in the right situation. Who knew a fancy dinner could feel like battle? Clearly rules existed, and Anselmo would have to learn them once he joined the upper ranks. Oh God. When I think of that, a part of me is kind of glad never to be a nobility. I can never be in that type of environment. Ugh, so stuffy. She's doing a really good job getting that sense of like anxiety through. So this is very well done. The Field Admiral headed for a group of stuffy old men. One woman, busty and expensively dressed, stood with them. As all a woman should be, expensively dressed and busty. Just kidding, guys. That's silly. Don't take what I said seriously. Council members, Admiral Dandala said quietly to Anselmo, let me speak for you. All these fools do is talk. Your silence will unnerve them. They won't be able to forget you. They reach the politicians. Good evening, Siori. Siora Passaro, she said to the woman. Anselmo gave a deep nod to the group. I'd like to introduce you all to Lieutenant Anselmo Erari. Lieutenant, eh? Lieutenant, eh? One of the old men said around a mouthful of cheese. You must be a lighting candidate. Admiral Dandolo put a hand on Anselmo's arm. He is Sura Cancio. I heard Lieutenant Erari's name several times while in Zorzi. He played an important role in our victory. That was an overstatement, but Anselmo didn't interrupt. Clearly she was maneuvering. For him, it was clear she was helping his future success, but for herself, he couldn't guess what. She nodded at the group. If you'll excuse me, the lieutenant has many others to meet, and dinner is upon us. The politicians nodded as Admiral Dandolo steered Anselmo away. They angled toward the 2 admirals of the military. One wore the blue-gray of the Armada, while the other sported lion blue. Both boasted several lines of honor on the shoulders of their doublets. I hate politicians, she said, but unfortunately they're necessary. I'd rather deal with a soldier any day. Men of direct action, like yourself. Men like Admirals Cantaneo and Galbani. Her voice rose at the names, so the men turned to greet them. Anselmo saluted as she introduced them. Galbani is over the lions. You're the lieutenant who fought off that ambush in the forest outside Zorzi, Galbani said. He wore a tightly groomed beard and barely touched his wine. And Samuel glanced at Admiral Dandolo, who nodded. Yes, sir, he said. What were the numbers? Galbani asked. I don't remember exactly, sir. Don't be modest, Admiral Dandolo said. 100 rebels to 50 men. Their captain was killed, and Lieutenant Arari took control immediately. Galbani nodded in respect. A natural leader. You'll do well as a lion. We'll fill your absence from the Armada, Admiral Cantaneo said. He stood nearly as tall as Anselmo with the crisp posture of a lifelong soldier. You're stealing 20 of our best yet, Galbani. It's my job, Galbani sipped his wine. My son, Raphael, is entering the labyrinth with you. He gestured at the table where the lion candidates sat. One man watched them with a curious expression on his face. Clearly the son, evident by the broad shoulders and square jaw he inherited from Galbani. Admiral Dandolo's gaze tracked something in the crowd. She stood to frown, then smoothed her face. The Doge will speak to the trainees soon, and Lieutenant Arari needs time to meet his fellow lion candidates. Good luck finding a patron tonight, Galbani said. I'd hate to see you lose your chance at the labyrinth. Anselmo, so why doesn't this dude just sponsor him? Or does he not have enough Skrilla? Oh, I guess it would be a conflict of interest, wouldn't it? Well, then what about his son? I don't know. Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting question, though. You don't have to address it now, but it'd be an interesting thing to bring up. Anselmo saluted once more before Admiral Dandolo led him away. They reached the edge of the crowd. The Doge spoke with a short man who bore a mustache like his, along with an unpleasant expression. Admiral Dandolo watched her brother before turning her attention back to Anselmo. I was pleased when I drew your name this week. Imelda has spoken well of you, and I meant what I said earlier. Your name was everywhere at Zorzi. Stick with me, and you'll go far. I would sponsor you if I could. Thank you, Fleet Admiral. So why can't she? I want to hear that. All right? I don't know how you bring it up, but I want to hear why can't military personnel sponsor this guy. I'm assuming it's because she's military personnel, but I do not know. Thank you, Fleet Admiral. Good luck in the labyrinth. Venezia. A man emerged from the crowd and kissed cheeks with the Fleet Admiral. Oh, that must be Lazaro. Oh no, it's Ulysses. He wore a gold crown and an open green jacket. His clothes were every bit as fine as everyone else's, but his casual appearance was jarring against the stiffness of the other partygoers. Admiral Dandolo smiled. Ulysses. Ooh, okay, this is Imelda's betrothal guy. She turned to Anselmo. You two should meet. Lieutenant Arari, this is His Majesty, King Ulysses Contarini of Heraclea. Ulysses, this is Lieutenant Anselmo Arari. He's a lion candidate. Perhaps both, Your Majesty, Anselmo said. Oh, wait. No, I skipped it. But this is interesting. So this is Imelda's betrothed that she's not really into, who's a charmer, against her current dude that she's in love with but can't be with. So this is an interesting little meaning here. Ulysses' smile was easy and as genuine as the crystal goblets being passed around the room. I don't know whether to congratulate or console you. Perhaps both, Your Majesty, Anselmo said. Ulysses laughed. I like him, he said to the Fleet Admiral. You always were a good judge of character, she nodded at Anselmo. My brother's preparing to speak to the lion candidates. Hurry. Anselmo saluted her, then walked over to the table for the lion candidates. Several of the men were already drunk. One even leaned back in his chair with his feet propped up on another seat. Raphael Gambini watched Anselmo with a cool look. Lieutenant Arari, right? Yes, sir. Ridiculous. He had to defer to these ducks. Their mamas and papas had all bought their ranks, just as they'd paid for them to enter the labyrinth. Likely none of these so-called soldiers had actually gone to Zorzi. I've heard of you. This was the one with his feet on a chair. He threw an olive and caught it in his mouth. He was still baby-faced, and the scraggly growth on his face could barely be counted as a beard. Far too young to be a captain. Raphael frowned. Enzio, the Doge is here. Enzio crossed his arms and leaned back even further. When's dinner going to start? I'm starving. Raphael rolled his eyes and turned to Anselmo. How do you know the Fleet Admiral? The other soldiers perked up. Even Enzio seemed interested. Anselmo tensed his jaw. What makes you think I know her? She seemed pretty friendly. And why would you care about that? Taking you around and introducing you to all the higher ups, playing favorites, that gives you an unfair advantage. You mean the higher ups, like your father, Admiral of the Lions, since we're talking about unfair advantages. That was awkward enough and pointed enough that I believe a derb like Anselmo would say it. But that doesn't make that line any less awkward and a derby thing to say, which might be what you're going for. Because it's definitely not smooth. It was very pointed and on the nose. Anzio laughed, and Raphael smacked his feet off the chair. That is very interesting. We got some interesting dynamics coming in here. So we're learning more about their culture, about how all these things kind of play out. And really, we're seeing a lot of setting building, right? Because a lot of it you saw for a while, there was no dialogue, and there was just kind of like this large block of text where they're discussing things. But it's because they're really diving into the power of the setting. So we're understanding, hey, this is a political atmosphere. These are people who don't trust each other, and there's a lot of privilege going around. And that was covered really, really well, all the while pushing the scene forward. So this is a really good idea of how you guys can build setting and context of the story, but at the same time still illuminate and stay grounded in the plot. Because remember, he's there to find a patron. And so this is something that's really important whenever you're making a chapter. Be like, what is the objective of this chapter, the objective of this character when you're doing it? What is the character needing specifically right now? In this case, we see that Anselmo is looking for a patron. And so through that sort of journey of looking for a patron just in this one context to go to the labyrinth, we learn about certain relationships. And then he's able to be guided from Venezia, with Venezia, to and from the other conversations. And this is just the first half of the chapter, guys. So it was a pretty big one. So stay tuned for the next chapter. Part 2 of this, so we can get that nailed on. I think I'm going to start putting the chapters on the same days just so you guys can get the full chapter and the context. But this is a really good example of just how to build setting and really kind of take the ideas of moving an objective but staying grounded in the story and the world. So done really, really well. I like this. So guys, again, like and subscribe if you're finding this helpful. And once again, my camera's out, but we're going to get back. And guys, thanks so much for coming and getting this far into the video. Please say thank you so much. Stay happy, stay healthy, subscribe and like the video, and keep writing.